My children, soldiers of the Special Air Service, you have a very early day tomorrow.
Dudley Clarke is one of the most influential figures of the Second World War that most people have never heard of. He did not lead dramatic charges or become a household name through battlefield heroics, yet his ideas shaped entire campaigns and altered the course of war in ways that most are entirely invisible.
Right flank, which we almost
Yet his ideas shaped entire campaigns and altered the course of the war in ways that were almost entirely invisible at the time. While modern portrayals such as SAS Rogue Heroes present Clarke as an eccentric and occasionally comedic figure, the real man was far more significant. He was a conceptual thinker, a planner, and a driving force behind Britain's wartime deception strategy, as well as a crucial figure in the intellectual and bureaucratic environment that both allowed the Commandos and the SAS to exist at all. To understand how modern special forces and strategic deception came to be, it is necessary to look past the dramatisation and examine the life and work of Dudley Clarke as it actually unfolded. This is the story of Brigadier Dudley Wrangle Clarke, the man who invented the Rogue Heroes. Now, before we get into the video, 99% of you who watch these videos are not subscribed. Now, if you enjoy this video or my content, then please consider leaving a like on this video and subscribing. It really helps me out and it lets you stay up to date with my channel. Dudley Clarke was born in Johannesburg in 1899 into a family already shaped by imperial adventure and controversy. His father had been involved in the Jameson raid and narrowly avoided imprisonment, and the family's early years were marked by the turbulence of the Second Boer War, including being caught in the siege of Ladysmith while Clarke was still an infant. The family returned to England soon after. At Charterhouse School, he was captivated by the nearby military presence at Aldershot, especially the Royal Flying Corps, whose glamour and novelty left a deep impression on him. From an early age, Clarke wanted to be at the centre of events where power, war, and history intersected. When the First World War broke out, Clarke was still a teenager, but his eagerness to serve was absolute. He entered the Officers Training Corps while underage and passed the Army entrance exam earlier than expected, attending the Royal Military Academy at Woolwich in 1916. Commissioned into the Royal Artillery at just 17, he was frustrated when his unit deployed to France without him due to his age. Rather than accept a passive role, he transferred to the Royal Flying Corps, learning to fly first in Reading and then later in Egypt. Although he never saw combat in the air, the war shaped his worldview, ideas that would later underpin his work in deception. After the war, despite holding Royal Flying Corps wings, he returned to the Royal Artillery, proudly wearing them against regulation, a small but telling sign of his willingness to bend rules quietly rather than openly challenge authority. Clarke served across the Middle East, including Mesopotamia during the Iraqi Revolt of 1920, where he helped evacuate civilians under pressure. In 1922, while on leave in Turkey during the Kanak crisis, he volunteered to assist British forces by feeding misinformation to Turkish nationalists. This was his first real experience with deception as an operational tool rather than a tactical trick, and it left a lasting impression. Through the 1920s and early 1930s, he combined soldiering with journalism, theatre, and intelligence work. He reported on the Rif War, and cultivated a reputation as a charming, theatrical, and intellectually unorthodox man. In 1936, he was posted to Palestine during the Arab Uprising, where he worked closely with John Dill and later Archibald Wavell. Faced with guerrilla war, limited resources, and political sensitivity, Clarke helped coordinate intelligence, communications, and counterinsurgency measures. Wavell recognised in him an originality and flexibility shared by few officers. When the Second World War began, Clarke's career accelerated dramatically. After early intelligence assignments in Norway, Ireland and France, he was serving as a military assistant to John Dill at the War Office when Britain faced disaster after Dunkirk. In this moment of crisis, Clarke conceived the idea of small, aggressive raiding forces to strike occupied Europe. He outlined what would become the British Commandos. His proposal was approved almost immediately by Churchill, and Clarke was tasked with creating the machinery to make it real. His presence on the first Commando raid, where he was wounded in the ear, became part of his legend, but his influence soon moved away from direct action and towards something far more consequential. In late 1940, Wavell summoned Clarke to Cairo in order to create a dedicated deception organisation. What began as a one-man operation working out of a converted bathroom evolved into Advanced Headquarters A Force, the most sophisticated deception unit of the war. Clarke understood that deception was not about tricking the enemy for his own sake, but about shaping enemy decisions. In Rogue Heroes, Clarke is portrayed as eccentric, flamboyant, and vaguely manipulative, often played for humour or intrigue. The real Clarke was methodical, patient, and intensely analytical. His first major deception, Operation Camilla, failed in its intended effect. but it taught him a foundational lesson that deception must make the enemy act, not merely believe. From this point forward, his thinking matured rapidly. One of the most striking images linked to Dudley Clarke is the photograph of him dressed in women's clothing, which SAS Rogue Heroes uses as the audience's first introduction to his character. The real incident occurred in 1941 in Madrid, when Clarke was arrested by Spanish police while wearing a dress. At the time when homosexuality was criminalised, the episode posed a serious threat to his career and to British intelligence operations, and it was quietly resolved through diplomatic channels because Clarke was considered too valuable to lose. By opening with this image, the series immediately frames Clarke as eccentric and unconventional. One of Clarke's most enduring contributions was the creation of phantom forces. In early 1941, he invented a fictional airborne formation called the 1st Special Air Service Brigade. This notional unit existed only on paper. It was designed to exploit Italian fears of airborne assault. When David Stirling later proposed a small raiding force to operate behind enemy lines, Clarke immediately saw the utility of linking it to his fictional formation. L Detachment Special Air Service was named partly to reinforce the illusion of a much larger airborne capability. Clarke's deception needs were instrumental in the naming, protection and early survival of the SAS. Without the cover provided by A-Force, Stirling's unit might have never been approved or sustained. The series also takes several creative liberties with Dudley Clarke's character that reshapes his relationships and actions for dramatic effect. In Rogue Heroes, Clarke is often portrayed as being at odds with David Stirling. In reality, the two men were on good terms, and Clarke was an early supporter of unconventional warfare, helping create the intellectual and institutional space that allowed ideas like Stirling's to be taken seriously at all. The show also suggests that Clarke deliberately left identifying serial numbers off the SAS lorry as part of a calculated deception, reinforcing the image of him as a shadowy puppet master. There is no solid evidence that this is a real, intentional act by Dudley Clarke. Perhaps the most misleading choice is tying much of Clarke's personal story to the character of Eve, a romantic and emotional anchor who does not appear to have existed in real life. This fictional relationship gives the audience a human lens through which to view Clarke, but it does so at the cost of historical accuracy, replacing the real complexities of his private life and professional pressures with a character created solely to serve the drama. Through 1942 and 43, Clarke continued to refine his deception tactics. Operation Cascade created an entirely fictional Allied order of battle, adding divisions, brigades and units that did not exist. Axis intelligence not only believed these formations were real, but incorporated them into their own planning for years. By the time of Alamein, Clarke's principles were fully formed. He coordinated with camouflage experts, signals units and intelligence officers to support operations like Bertram, which misled Rommel about the timing and direction of the British attack. Rogue Heroes barely touches on this world, focusing more on the SAS's actions, but Clarke's work arguably saved tens of thousands of lives by shaping enemy expectations before the battle was even fought. His influence extended beyond North Africa into the Mediterranean and eventually into the planning of Allied deception for Sicily, Italy and even Normandy, where his ideas formed the intellectual foundation of Operation Bodyguard. After the war, Clarke retired quietly in 1947. Much of his work remained classified, denying him any public recognition. He wrote histories, worked for the Conservative Party. When he died in 1974, only a handful of insiders understood the scale of his contribution. Later historians would describe him as the master of military deception, a man who shaped modern psychological warfare almost from nothing. Compared to his depiction in SAS Rogue Heroes, the real Dudley Clarke was less chaotic and more profound. Clarke did not simply support the rise of the SAS or dabble in deception. He built an entire system that convinced enemy commanders to fight battles that only existed in their minds. In a war defined by firepower and attrition, Dudley Clarke proved that ideas, carefully planted and patiently cultivated, could be just as decisive as any army in battle. If you enjoyed this dive into one of the many Rogue Heroes and want to hear more real stories behind the legends, hit like, subscribe and let me know who you'd like to see next. Because sometimes history doesn't need a rewrite, it just needs to be told properly.